Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajagacharya Astatarasi Srimad Divine Grace of High Charanand Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Swami Belief Founder Charges Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Gauda Premanandi. All glories to the Summit devotees. All glories to the Summit devotees. All glories to the Summit devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Padastai Bhule Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Bachanani Vishesha Shunyavadi Pastatari Satari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 6, entitled Creation of the Universal Form. Text. What number is that? Text number 8, sorry. Esha hi ashesha Sattvanam Atmangsaha Paramatmana Adyo Avataro Yatra Sao Bhuta Gramo Vibhavyate Esha Yashesha Sattvanam Esha hi shesha sattvanam Atmang sak paramatmana Atmang sak paramatmana Ajo vataro yatraso Ajo vataro yatraso Bhuta gramo vibhavyate Bhuta gramo vibhavyate Esha shesha sattvanam Atmang sak paramatmana Ajo vataro yatraso Bhuta gramo vibhavyate Esha vibhaja sattvanam Atmang sa paramatmana Ajovataro yatra sau Bhuta gramo vibhavyate Esha yashesha sattvanam Atmang sak paramatmana Ajovataro yatra sau Bhuta gramo vibhavyate Shesha sattvanam Atmang sak paramatmana Ajovataro yatra sau Bhuta gramo vibhavyate. Ladies. Esha yashesha sattvanam Atmang sak paramatmana Yadoyutara yatrasau Bhutagramo vibhavyate Esha yashesha sattanam Atman sak paramatmanaha Adyo yataro yatrasau vibhavyate Esha, this, he, certainly, Ashesha, unlimited, Sattvanam, living entities, Atma, self, Angsha, part, Parama Atmanaha, of the Supersoul, Adyaha, the first, Avatara, incarnation, Yatra, whereupon, Asau, all those, Bhutagrama, the aggregate creations, Vibhavyate, flourish. Translation and purport. By His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The gigantic universal form of the Supreme Lord is the first incarnation and plenary portion of the Supersoul. He is the self of an unlimited number of living entities, and in Him rests the aggregate creation which thus flourishes. Purport. The Supreme Lord expands Himself in two ways. By personal plenary expansions and separated minute expansions. The personal plenary expansions are Vishnu Tattvas, and the separated expansions are living entities. Since living entities are very small, they are sometimes described as the marginal energy of the Lord. But the mystic yogis consider the living entities and the Supersoul, Paramatma, to be one and the same. It is, however, a minor point of controversy. After all, everything created rests on the gigantic Virat, or universal form of the Lord. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitam Jena Tasmai Sigurave Namah. Ukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Iram Yakipidam Mande Siguram Dinatanana Paramananda Maharavam Sijitanishwaram. Translation again, the gigantic universal form of the Supreme Lord is the first incarnation and plenary portion of the Supersoul. He is the self of an, that's a capital self, of an unlimited number of living entities, and in Him rests the aggregate creation which thus flourishes. So, here Srila Prabhupada is beginning to, in a very nice way, he touches upon the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Achintya Beda Beda Tattva, that there is a simultaneous oneness between the living being and the Supreme Soul. It's explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnera Tatasta Shakti Beda Beda Prakash, that there is a oneness between all spiritual beings. But at the same time, there's a difference. That one is described as the greatest of the great, and the other is described as the smallest of the small. Anor aniyam mahato mahiyan atmasya jantor nihita guhayam. That although there is a oneness, there's for sure, we don't have any argument. There's a oneness between all living beings. But at the same time, there is a difference in that one is described as the marginal, Beta Prakash. That one is, although we're eternal and cognizant, as is the Absolute, as is the Super-Soul, the atomic soul is marginal. And he's an eternal servant. And they're both situated in the same region. The region of the heart is described. The super soul and atomic soul are situated there within the living being. And they're described as being side by side. And of the same quality, right? Yasmin sarvani bhutani atmaiva buddhijanata ekatvam anupashyata. They're both of the same quality. And just as the super soul is eternal, the atomic soul is also eternal. Just as the super soul is cognizant, the atomic soul is also cognizant. But there is, just as Prabhupada always gives the example of gold, there's the gold ring, which is a small little item, and you have the gold mine, which is the source of that ring. There's a difference in quantity, but the quality is the same. So we don't have any argument, as Prabhupada points out here. It's a minor controversy that the mystic yogis are seeing their oneness with the Supersoul, but still one is greater than the other. Just again, as we may have a gold mine and you have the little particle of gold, the same quality is there, but the quantity is different. And again, they're both situated within the same region. And the difference again being that one is greater than the other. To see that quality of oneness is the proper vision. That is for sure. One should see that all living beings are spiritual sparks. And one who sees with that vision, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gebe Hastani, he's a true knower of things. If we can recognize that all living beings are spiritual sparks, that's the proper knowledge, that's the proper understanding. And to see otherwise is to be influenced by the material energy. And they both, the atomic soul and the super soul, but particularly the atomic soul, he has the facility to live in either conditions. One can live in the material condition, where he has to suffer the threefold miseries, right? Adhyatmic, adhidhavik, bhautik. These different miseries are inflicted upon one who is, as the Vedic literatures describe, as being one who's influenced by the mode of ignorance, by nescience. Yasya chaitargya shakti sa. That he has the facility, the living entity has the facility to live in either place, but because he's influenced by avidya, it covers his constitutional position, as we mentioned earlier, right? Krishna Nityadas, that the living entity is, by nature, his constitutional position is to be a servant of the Absolute. But when that is forgotten due to the influence of avidya or nescience, one forgets one's position and is subject to the influence of the modes of material nature, where one has to constantly struggle. Today is a good day, yesterday was a bad day. The dualities of material life, they're subject, one who's controlled by the modes of material nature, that is the experience that identifying with the body, one loses sight or loses that understanding. And as soon as one loses that understanding, one tries to enjoy in the material sphere, Krishna Bahir Mukhan Bhogavanchakari. And as soon as he tries to enjoy in that atmosphere, that material sphere, he's snatched, right? He's immediately struck down. It's just like a little mouse who is attracted to the smell of the little peanut butter in the little have-a-heart. We don't use snap traps, but in the have-a-heart. He's attracted to the little smell of the peanut butter. He goes in there and wants to nibble on it, and immediately the doors close, and he's trapped. So the living entity, as soon as he wants to enjoy in this material world and sees and forgets his constitutional position, his true nature, and begins to try and taste this material world, he's immediately trapped. Pisachi paile. And then he acts as if he's ghostly haunted. And we see that all around us. That people are, the conditioned souls, are struggling with who they actually are. And they sometimes act as if ghostly haunted. Just as little mouse, he's trapped inside that box. All of a sudden you can see the anxiety and the terror that he's experiencing. Sometimes they even die out of fright. It's so traumatic. So the living being, he's, as soon as he wants to enjoy in this material world, he gets trapped. He's immediately snatched and struck down by the material energy. And he forgets his position and he begins acting as if ghostly haunted. Sometimes we don't see it in the daytime, but sometimes in the evening you can hear, Archita hears, sometimes people, they walk up and down Venice and they're talking to someone or they're yelling at something. And when you actually come up to them and speak to them, you can see it, that the actual person is not there. There's something else that's invading their consciousness. So similarly, the living being, as soon as he wants to enjoy in this material world, he begins acting like, unnaturally. The natural position of the living being is to be Satchit Ananda, full of bliss, with a whole different consciousness. But as soon as one is haunted by the desires of sense enjoyment, he's subject to those threefold miseries and loses sight of who he is. Sometimes even the yogis, they lose sight of their oneness but difference with the Supreme Soul, the Paramatma. And they may sometimes identify with it and try to merge into it. And of course, this is not the clear understanding. There is a oneness, but again, there's a difference. That oneness is in quality, but the difference is that the Supreme Soul, he's the one that's he's overseeing. Paramatmeti chapyukto dehismin purushak para. He's the overseer. He sees what's going on, but he's not partaking in the same enjoyment as the atomic soul. He's overseeing. He can see what's clearly happening, and he's permitting. But in addition to that, he's the proprietor. Unfortunately, the conditioned souls, due to their delusional understanding, begin to think that, yes, I am this scientist, or I am this famous athlete, or I'm this, or I'm that. And again, Purushak Prakriti Stohi Bhunkte Karanam Gunasanga Sarasa Joni Janmasu. They are subject to the trials and tribulations of material life due to having this misunderstanding that we're the enjoyer. The other soul there, the other being, is that Paramatma, who's the overseer and permitter, but he's also the supplier, as the Vedic literatures tell us. Nitya Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. Not only is he in charge and permitting, overseeing, but he's providing everything. Oh, if you want to enjoy in such and such a way, okay, then so be it. You want to make a so-called comfortable situation in this world, so be it. So he's providing everything. Therefore, we can understand that, as Prabhupada points out here at the end of the purport, that everything is resting in him, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, right? Nidanam bija avayam, that he's the resting place and the eternal seed. And so many things are going on in the universe, but everything is resting on him. And elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that he's the, as pearls are strung on a thread. What is that verse? What is the first line? Everything is resting upon Krishna as pearls are strung on a thread. Just as we can see on the deities, there's so many different beautiful decorations. There's beautiful necklaces. And in their own right, those beads are very attractive. But they take on a different quality and a different beauty when they're strung together nicely. So, although there may be so many, in the eyes of some, there may be so many beautiful things within this world, we have to understand that it's all strung together, it's all controlled and all dependent upon that absolute truth. Just as pearls are strung on a thread, that necklace becomes very attractive. It takes on a special quality. So the living beings also, they're very attractive, but they become supremely attractive when they're engaged in service to the absolute truth. When we're connected by that process of bhakti yoga, then it becomes a special experience. It becomes a special nature. Otherwise, he's just struggling with the material energy and in some deluded idea thinks that he can enjoy. It's not reality. So this is a very nice verse, but Srila Prabhupada is so nicely and very in a very expert way, he's touching upon this teaching of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who taught that the living beings are one in quality with the Lord, but the difference is that he's the supreme soul and we are the atomic. There's a oneness, but there's also a difference. We're dependent on his mercy. And that is the proper understanding of oneness. We'll end there. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Maharaj. Brigapati Prabhu?
I have a question about the last two sentences in the purport.
Mm-hmm.
Prabhupada says, but the mystic yogis consider all living entities and the super soul, Paramatma, to be one and the same. And then he goes on to say, it is, however, a minor point of controversy. And you picked up on that phrase, minor point of controversy. And then he goes, after all, everything created rests on the gigantic Virat, or the universal form of the Lord. So, yeah, sure. So based upon what I've read and heard, my impression would be that that's like a major point of controversy. That if you could comment upon that, because I noticed you did pick up on that phrase. And then what is the relationship between the mystic yogi considering the living entities in the super soul, the Paramatma, to be one and the same, and everything resting on the gigantic Virat, or the universal form of the Lord? What's the relationship there, or the connection there? Because it seems like they're two unrelated things to me off the top of my head. Or thinking.
Well, sometimes the mystic yogis, they become enamored by the Brahman effulgence and the mystic powers that one attains by his yogic practice. And from what I can understand, begins to think that he's the source of that due to his practice and attainment of different siddhis, certain perfections. Anima, Lagima, Mahima, there's so many different siddhis that one achieves by practicing mystic yoga. One becomes deluded or covered over and thinks that that's the ultimate. That would be my understanding. Meditating upon that super soul, that Paramatma, right? They're meditating on the Paramatma, and by their mystic, by their austerities, they're developing certain mystic powers, and they come to the point of thinking that they've become one with that Supreme Soul. When in actuality, there's always a distinction, there's always a difference. That super soul is providing the atomic soul with whatever they're searching for. That would be my understanding of that. Yeah. Archie, you want to comment on that?
It's an important point. You answered it thoroughly by bringing in Achintya Beta Beta Tattva. That completely explains that point. But to further explain it, the minor or major depends on your point of view. So from the point of view of a little child who's trying to emulate his father, for him, it's major. But for the father, it's minor. If the son thinks that he's the same as the father, it's a minor thing for the father. He doesn't care. As long as you don't, take the keys at night as a 3-year-old and jump in the car and try to drive it somewhere. But yes, externally, the son and the father are one. So it's not a big point to debate. But whether it's minor or major depends on your point of view. From the point of view of God and those who are completely surrendered to God, if a yogi thinks that he's the same as God, it's a minor point. It's minor. But from our point of view, it's major. Because you can definitely get yourself in trouble thinking that you're God. You see?
And to think that you can become the absolute, it's a misunderstanding. It's not that the small part can become the whole. The small part may be a part of the whole, and there's always a individuality there. There's an eternal individuality there, as Archita Prabhu was pointing out. That individuality remains, is constant. But under the influence of material energy, it's actually Mahamaya. The yogis think that they've become one. But that it's not the clear, what is that philosophy? To become the absolute, to become God, starts with an A, Ashardvo Upasana, something like, I forget, Srila Prabhupada quotes that. Asamud, I don't know. But Ahangrahopasana, that's what it is. Yeah, that I become. It's a misunderstanding. It's not that you can become. It's a misunderstanding. It's not that you can become the absolute. And this is what the materialists are trying to do. That's what Hiranyakashipu wanted to do. It's not a reality. And the second point, I found that to be, the second part of your question, I thought that was quite interesting also. That it is, however, a minor point of controversy. After all, everything created rests on the gigantic Virat, or universal form of the Lord. Well, again, I think, Srila Prabhupada is just making the point that the mystic yogis, by their austerities, they're traveling to higher and higher destinations, but all of that is within the universal form of the Lord. All of that is contained within, again, the universal form of the Lord. And they may travel here and there, they may achieve certain levels of perfection and understanding and purity, but again, it's all still dependent on the absolute.
Yeah, you had mentioned in the course of your talk, first of all, thank you very much for a nice talk. And you had mentioned in the course of your talk the terms, the threefold miseries. And so for those of us who might be a little new and who may have not read many of Srila Prabhupada's books, what are those threefold miseries, and how do they arise, and how can they be conquered or overcome, or should they be overcome or conquered? So, in other words, what I'm saying, there are threefold miseries. So there's a first one, a second one. So if you can give us the first, then the second, then the third, and then how they arose and how they can be overcome. Go ahead.
There's first Adhyatmika Klesha, which is miseries that pertain to the self, the body and mind. And we all have experience of that. Sometimes the body is giving some trouble. Sometimes the mind is giving some trouble. So that's one misery that one is challenged with every day, practically. And when that is not a challenge, then there's adibautika. Then there's miseries that are inflicted by other living beings. You're sitting there peacefully in a good state of mind, and all of a sudden, zzz, you get attacked by a little mosquito. Or somebody drives by and they have their stereo on so loud that it shakes the room. Or somebody else is causing some issue, or maybe you've got into an argument with another living being or another person. The dogs bark. I mean, there's so many things that come from other living beings that we try to control, but inevitably they cause some misery. Maybe even a loved one, a family member, is causing some anxiety in the mind, or even physically. So adibautic, other living beings are also inflicting various miseries upon us. So when the mind could be very peaceful, very nice, there's nobody bothering me, I'm out here in the mountains and I'm meditating very peacefully, and then all of a sudden a rainstorm comes. Or there's or you get struck by a lightning. The other day, some lady was walking with her 2 dogs, not far from here. I was talking to Robert. I had told his brother, and he wasn't too far from what happened. This lady was walking in some grassy area outside, and she got struck by some lightning and died on the spot, and her dogs as well. So, adidaivaka, there's also miseries that are inflicted upon us by nature, by material nature. So you could be very happy in your little setting and nobody's bothering you, but then all of a sudden there's an earthquake. So these threefold miseries are constantly there. Sometimes they're all there, sometimes there's one there, sometimes there's a mixture, but those threefold miseries are there because one chooses to enjoy in the material world, chooses to take part in material consciousness. It's when you make that choice. As soon as you make that choice, then you're subject to those threefold miseries. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Tribhir Gunamaya Bhavai Ebi Sarvamidam Jagat, that Krishna is, that is again the difference between the atomic and the super, is that he's never disturbed by those threefold miseries. But the living being, Krishna says, Daiviyesha Gunamayi, that he's always disturbed by those threefold miseries because again he's in a material state of mind, in an enjoying state of mind. So how to get rid of it? That is what Krishna consciousness is all about. We're trying to teach how by regulated activity, by the practice of bhakti yoga, whether it be rising early, whether it's chanting, whether it's engaging in devotional service, whether it's in outreach, whether it's sweeping the floor, or whether it's even eating sanctified foodstuffs, engaging in some sort of devotional activity, it frees one from the grips of those material modes, and those threefold miseries do not become such an obstacle. It's not that as a devotee you don't have to deal with earthquakes. We've had to deal with earthquakes here. But as a devotee, one is not disturbed or distracted from what is the goal. We're not distracted from what is our purpose. Sure, the tooth is bothering me like crazy, and I have to go to a dentist. Or something else is happening. There's so many things that the miseries are attacking us. But it's not a deterrent. It's not a distraction. It's not an obstacle in our practice. The devotee is firmly fixed in devotional service, and those threefold miseries do not become such an issue in one's execution. So that's why we practice bhakti yoga. That's why we chant. That's why we study and listen to the liberated souls, because it's by their example. They're showing practically what it is to become freed from the modes of material nature. Their consciousness is totally fixed in Krishna. They can do this and this and that. They can go out here and they can go there, but they're not affected by the modes, the constant agitation that's there. So our remedy is the remedy that's been given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and that is chanting Hare Krishna.
Thank you. If I may just
Yes.
add a little something. The most important point is that a liberated or a divinely situated person is a person whose every moment, every second is dedicated to some manner or form of loving Krishna, and that comes in the form of service. So as we give more and more of service to the Lord, those miseries that you just mentioned gradually disappear, because we become absorbed in the loving service of the Lord, and that becomes our all in all. And therefore, those obstacles that you mentioned, such as body and mind problems or problems from other living entities, while they're still there, they don't affect us. They don't disturb us. And consequently, they're not miseries in the ultimate or truest sense. They're miseries to people who want to enjoy this world. But for one who wants to enjoy giving or serving the Lord, they're not at all affected. That's all I would just tack on. Thanks for your nice explanation, by the way. Appreciate that.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.